It's July, which means it's the time of the year that we dream for and plan for in our gardens. But a lot of times we get to this hottest part of the year and not everything looks so great. I thought it would be fun to bring you on a garden tour and give you a little bit of an update on my garden, what's going well, but I'm not gonna hide the stuff that isn't going well. I'll share what the real parts of the garden actually are, and also a little bit about how the changes that I've made in my garden this year, how they're going. This year I created a new kitchen garden space. If you've seen past YouTube videos, you can see the building of it, the filling of the beds, what I planted. And the purpose was to downsize some of my garden so that I could manage it a little bit better. And I will say that most of the good parts of my garden are actually here in this kitchen garden, and a lot of the reason is because I've been able to focus more on it. I actually had some issues with tomatoes earlier in the season. They had gotten pretty badly infested with aphids, but I left them alone, and the aphids ended up being taken care of by ladybug larvae and all of that. They've definitely gotten better, but then I started having problems with early blight. You can see a little bit of that in some of these leaves, but I've been pretty diligent at picking off these leaves with this early blight, and you can see that the plant has rebounded. Now, we've been in the upper 90s, low 100s, so they're actually not loving this heat, but I would say that they're actually doing pretty well considering some of the challenges they had earlier in the season. You may recall that this particular bed had broccoli and cabbage in it. Once I harvested that, I planted okra here, and I've got some poblano peppers that are kind of competing with the okra right now. But my bigger problem has been this year, you can see right here, this is an example. Japanese beetles have been terrible this year, absolutely terrible. And I've really never had them on my okra before. But what I've been doing every morning is coming and inspecting and finding them and then knocking them off into a cup of soapy water. That's really what I've been doing to try to keep a handle on it. But it's really strange because I see them more in this garden area than I do my big garden. My big garden has a lot more birds. I don't know if that made a difference. Not quite sure. Here I've got some bell peppers. These have done fantastic, but I have had some issues with them wilting later in the day. I've been putting some shade cloth to help because it's been so hot. The sweet potatoes here are taking off, which was exactly what I planned to do. So far, that's going really great. Moving over to this bed, you probably remember that I harvested potatoes from this bed. My experiment was planting some paprika peppers, but I planted them late. I planted them much later than normal. We'll see how they do. They have had some issues with some pests. I do have some shade cloth here because I have another experiment back here with lettuce. So far, this lettuce is doing okay in the shade cloth. Interestingly, the peppers in the shade cloth are doing better back here than the ones right here in full sun, which that's definitely an interesting observation so far. Over here in this bed, this is where I had squash, but it got overcome with the squash vine borer, which I always expect and plan for. I haven't really planted much except a couple of zinnias because I think I'm gonna save the rest of this for a fall crop, but it gave me quite a few squash and zucchini, so I'm definitely not complaining about that. Moving back here, more tomatoes. If you recall, I only planted a few varieties of tomatoes. So far, just an update on that. These Parks Whopper have done really well. They actually have caught up and even outperformed some of my other ones. I've already harvested several, so I'm really happy with these Parks Whopper. Now, one particular plant that's been a little bit challenging has been this eggplant. I just harvested a little bit from it, but it's still been really struggling with flea beetle damage, and I think it had too much shade initially with this parsley. And then I have an eggplant on the other side too. So that's been a little bit of a challenge. Surprisingly, the eggplant in my green stalk has been doing a lot better, but I also planted it a little bit later. So I'm thinking that this eggplant had a hard time not only with early pests, but also maybe some early cool weather. So overall, the kitchen garden I feel like has been a really good success. Not a whole lot of misses necessarily, but my big garden that I'm getting ready to take you to, that's kind of a different story. I've been so focused on this garden, and honestly, I've just enjoyed it so much that I've kind of let the other garden go to some degree, and that's pretty evident. But still, I want to show you those parts, the parts that aren't so great too. Partly because I just want to be real and show that I have let some things slide, but I'm learning to try to be okay with that because I've enjoyed having this part of my garden so much. So let's go into the big garden and take a look. As we go into the big garden, I'm always passing by these blueberry bushes, and it has been a fantastic blueberry year. We didn't have any kind of late freeze, and I've been eating off of them pretty much every day. Blueberries have been my breakfast and my snack. It's been amazing. Look at all of these. I'm very, very grateful. I've picked gallons and gallons from these. These are about 10 years old. Did you see the rabbit? Oh, that's a squirrel. Okay, so this is another issue I've been having with my big garden, is because I haven't focused too much on it. When I walk into this garden, I'm usually greeted by a squirrel or a rabbit or more, because that has been the story of this garden this year. I didn't have the energy to fix all the breaches in the fence, so the rabbits have been getting in, and then the squirrels have just gotten a little bit more bold. So they're here. I haven't really noticed that they've been eating a whole lot that's been a problem, but I'm sure that they're here for a reason. So the big part of this garden has been that I have not planted anything in this ground bed space. Now I have kept it mowed just because I didn't want it to have any major issues with grass growing, snakes, although I've seen a couple snakes in here too. The good ones, not the bad ones. But this has been the main part that I've let go pretty much, and I've focused exclusively on my raised beds. This is the first part that isn't necessarily Instagram worthy, and I knew this was going to happen, but this bed is full of bell peppers, probably the biggest plants I've ever seen, which is a great thing, and basil, and then I planted watermelon underneath all of that. But we got a big windstorm a couple of weeks ago. Some of the peppers were knocked down. I've been trying to get them back up, but it's been a little bit of a challenge. Some of these basil plants were knocked down. I've had to take some of those out. But the challenge with watermelon is that when it grows, it just grows and grows and grows, and it creates a little bit of a mess. But it's something that I was prepared for. The only problem is that when I'm growing it like this, it really makes it hard to mow and weed eat. So it's hard for me to get in there without worrying that I'm going to encounter a snake. Usually I'm not in here much unless I have boots on. But I'm still very hopeful for my watermelon harvest, even if the whole area doesn't look all that great. In this area, I just harvested the rest of my onions, which I'll share with you in next week's video. Got, looks like a new little watermelon right here. And then I'm leaving this bed. I just harvested the potatoes from this one. I'm leaving this bed until the fall. The great news about these two beds is I don't have anything growing in them, so I don't want to waste water on these beds. And with these Garden in Minutes garden grids, all I have to do is just actually, the water system's going right now, I can feel it, but I shut it off. If I wanted to water it, then I would just turn it on. So you can just turn it on like this. This one is just, it's got a little bit lower pressure over here, but you can see that it's dripping here. So if I ever want to start re-irrigating this, I can. But because I don't want to waste water, I don't want to just sit here and water the soil. I can just turn this switch and turn it off, and that way I don't have to waste the water to the bed until I'm ready to plant. Moving over to these raised beds, this has been kind of an interesting thing. So in the middle of the celery here, which I really need to harvest, in the middle of the celery I have okra, and it's doing okay. I planted it from seed, but if you look and compare over here, this okra, these plants are so much bigger. I planted these from transplants, which I've never done before, but you can just see how huge they are. But they were all roughly planted at the same time, and I thought it was really interesting that these have been a little bit smaller, and I'm wondering if the celery has anything to do with it, if it's taking some of the water, because celery loves water, or if there's some other reason. Now, see a little grasshopper here, another challenge with the summer garden. These are getting a little bit eaten up. I think that this is mainly grasshopper damage, not from the Japanese bean beetle. Moving over here, I've got cucumbers. These are ones that I planted a little bit later. They weren't the first planting of the year, but you can see down here, they're already starting to be bothered by, I am guessing this is some kind of maybe downy mildew. It could also be pest damage, but I think it's disease, or sometimes cucumbers just tend to get a little bit old. But one thing I love about growing on a trellis is that I can clip these off, and I definitely need to do that. Another thing I just haven't made time to do yet. But they will continue growing and continue doing photosynthesis and continue producing fruits. So you can see here, I've got lots of great looking cucumbers coming on this plant, even though they're diseased at the bottom. I have found that when I'm growing cucumbers up a large trellis like this, they tend to last a little bit longer before they just really completely die out. But that's been a little bit of a challenge here. Overall, though, I'm really happy with the plant. And then we've got these cantaloupes coming on. I need to put them on a hammock before they drop. That's going to be on the to-do list today. But these are doing really well growing up this trellis. So I'm really excited about that. I'm ready for some cantaloupe. Moving on here, I've got succession plantings of corn going. And you can see on this side, this corn was planted right after I harvested the beets. So if you remember me harvesting the beets a couple of weeks ago, I planted corn right after that. It has grown so fast, and I'm really excited about this harvest. And then probably a couple of weeks after that, I planted a succession planting of corn. I planted in these raised beds, and it's really interesting because I planted all of these at the same time. These had really good germination and these did not, and I'm not really sure why. And then I also planted this planting at the same time, and they had really good germination. Now this is a different variety than those are, so I don't know if that's partly makes a difference, but we'll see. My goal with the corn is just to be able to get continual harvests of corn so we can have fresh corn on the cob a little bit longer. That's my goal. And my goal is also to see if I can plant and grow corn successfully in raised beds. I've never really had the greatest luck with that because pollination can be a little bit more difficult if you don't have a lot of corn all at once. But considering that I'm doing 18 or 20 feet of corn in a raised bed, I'm crossing my fingers that that'll work. Now here's the area that I've just been really frustrated with, mainly because it's kind of been overgrown. I've got these huge mammoth sunflowers that have been, they're incredible. Can't even tell you how tall they are. I wouldn't even begin to estimate. But because we had that storm, you can see that the wind blew it down and it's just been a little more of an eyesore. We've got these evening sun sunflowers that are beautiful, but it's really hard to tell because it's been blown down a little bit. These are Mexican sunflowers. These were volunteers from the previous year. I really like these in the fall, so I'll let them stay. But my frustration has been this area has become very weedy, and these are my sweet potatoes. Now, I was told later that sweet potatoes don't always do well planted next to sunflowers. I didn't really know that, so this will be a test to see if that actually bears out. But you can see they've been eaten. So I think the rabbits have been in here eating just the sweet potato leaves. They haven't really eaten anything else. But that's been a little bit frustrating. Is just seeing all the sweet potato vines being eaten and just this whole bed being a little bit weedy. But every time I come out here and I get a little bit frustrated, I just have to remember that this year has been my year to cut back, not do as much canning, to give myself a little bit of a rest. And honestly, that's been worth it. I've really enjoyed my evenings, not spending every single evening in the garden, not coming out here at the crack of dawn every single morning. While I enjoyed that when I did it, this year has been a good year of rest. So I've been trying to be okay with some of this that doesn't look so great. And even this part of the garden is a very frustrating mess. I've got blackberries that are doing really well, but you can see how all of these sunflowers have been blown over, so they don't look so great. And then I've got some weeds growing back there. There's so much cleanup that I need to do in the garden eventually, but I'm just letting it go for now. I'm just prioritizing what's important to me this season. There's always going to be time for cleanup. Right now, I'm just going to enjoy what I have in my garden as well as I can and enjoy this season of rest. Finally, I have this raised bed with onions. They're very small. I'm going to share that with you in next week's video because it's going to be part of me giving you an update on my onion succession planting. So tune in for that. And then over here, though, I have my succession planting of carrots. And so far, so good. I think they're about ready to harvest. And I can just look and see. You saw me harvesting my other carrots in another YouTube video. This is the succession and looks like they're ready to go. So I need to harvest those soon. One last thing though, this bed here had broccoli in it, but I also planted cabbage and what I thought was cauliflower. I actually bought cauliflower at a local nursery. And I keep trying to peel this back thinking, is there a cauliflower in there? But I really think maybe it was mislabeled and maybe this is some kind of cabbage. I don't know. I've never grown anything this shape exactly. I know I need to harvest it just to see. But if you know what this is, you can tell me. Maybe you recognize that. But I thought it was cauliflower. Don't think it is. One of those things that happens. I hope you've enjoyed this tour of my garden. I hope you have learned a few things and more importantly, learned that gardening, I have realized over the years, isn't just a matter of harvest and how much can I get, but I really want it to be part of an enjoyable part of my life, part of my lifestyle, but not something that I'm just working. There's a place for that, and there's people that do that, and at certain times in my life I did that, but I've been leading more into just enjoying it and getting what I can out of it. And sometimes that means it doesn't all look the best. So I hope you've enjoyed this tour of my garden, and I will see you again next episode where I'll give you an update on my onion succession planting. I learned a lot. There has been so much about this whole experiment that I can't wait to share with you. So make sure you're subscribed, and I'll see you on that episode.